Today we're talking about extended mesh tools, and those display whenever you are in edit mode here in the 3D view. So if we press tab to go into edit mode, and we're in our Sensei tab, of course, here, we'll see this set of tools here under extended. Quick overview of everything we're seeing here. So of course up top we have our set origin options, which this is really only used in object mode. So if I were to press tab to go back into object mode, we have origin to cursor, which, as we talked about before, the origin is a little orange dot in the middle of an object. It's what the object rotates, scales around, etc. So if I were to say right click and move my cursor over here somewhere, and under set origin, click origin to cursor, then that's going to move the origin point of this selected object, or if I had a bunch of objects, to that point. So now if I press R to rotate, it's going to rotate around the origin there. And so I could even move my cursor over here, and the object is going to scale, rotate, etc. around that point. Under here we have origin to object, which basically means it's going to move the origin point back to the center of that selected object. So if I were to click that, then that goes back there. So for instance, if I double right click here and add a monkey, and say we moved our 3D cursor over here, and we said origin to cursor, and so now this monkey's origin point is over here. If I were to click origin to object, it's going to put it back to that object. So the reset selected, all that will do is reset the rotation of an object. Say I were, doing some tests with some object, and I don't know, I had rotated it in some weird way that I didn't like. I can come here and press reset selected. So the same with this cube here, I could come here and press reset selected. The little sliver in between set origin and this cube icon here, this will disable 3D cursor snapping. So the 3D cursor is, of course, the little lifesavery looking thing that moves when we right click our mouse. And so by default in Sensei format, if we drop that cursor over an object, it will snap to that object's origin point. Or if we hold Alt and right click, it'll snap to some face, vertex point, or edge of the object. But if you want to disable that, you can always click this. So it's enabled by default. So when you click it down, that means, okay, it's no longer in use. And now wherever you let go of the 3D cursor, it will drop wherever you let go of it. And then of course, this little icon here, we talked about how we can move the origin point of an object around. This moves whatever you have selected to your 3D cursor. So if I were to right click my 3D cursor over here, click this button, then I have that cube selected and it will move there. So if I press G to move that back and shift select these and press that again, it will move whatever I had selected to the position of my 3D cursor. So this kind of stuff is all about origin points and snapping and cursory type stuff that if you can get a handle on it early on, can really save you some time down the road. Down here we have our mirroring, cloning, parenting, and joining and separating tools. So if I were to say press 1 to go into front view, and maybe move this over here, rotate this monkey or something, maybe duplicate this a few times. Here we can mirror our selection on whatever axis point that we want to mirror it. So if I were to press B to do a border select and select all these things, I could press X mirror and that would mirror that. I can, in a sense, cock this gun. It's kind of how I think about it. By clicking it, it will say clone there. And then if we were to press X again, we have cloned this selection. Or if we were to set it to clone and then press Z, we could do it like that as well. So this is just some quick tools for doing that sort of thing. So we talked about parenting. That allows us to control a bunch of objects with one object. So say I wanted to parent these monkeys to this cube here, I could shift select these two monkeys and then finally select the object that I want to be the parent, which would be this cube. So shift select that, then press parent, and now these two monkeys are the children of this cube. And if I click on the cube, I can press G to grab, S to scale, R to rotate, whatever, and these guys are going to follow suit. Meanwhile, I still have the ability to individually edit them and do things to them. And then when I go back to clicking on the parent object, we're going to have control there. So you can always tell what object has been made a child of something by this little X that will pop up when you click on an object. If you see the X there, it means you can get rid of that child-parent relationship for that object. And so we could click that, and now if we press G to move this cube around. This one that we remove the relationship from is no longer following. Parenting is kind of a more sophisticated way that gives you more control of just this simple joining or separating. So if I were to say, instead of parent all these, just shift select all of them and then press the join button, they've now merged into one single mesh. You can see they all have one origin point, and if we click off them and then click on again, they all get selected because they are not they anymore, to speak. They are one mesh object now. So if we were to press tab to go into edit mode, we can edit all of this because it's all one thing now. That's what the join does. Press tab to go back into object mode, and of course if we want to go back to having these as separate objects, we can press separate. So below that we have our bevel button, and we're going to go much more over using this bevel button along with bevel tools in another video, but basically this adds us a bevel modifier and some smoothing onto an object because the bevel modifier is really common to use. And we can then apply the effects of that bevel modifier, and you can see it shows up over here once we press that, or we can press this little X to get rid of it. So if we didn't want it anymore, we'd press X and then it would be gone. And then we can of course change our shading to smooth or flat right here. Below this we have snap to grid. So if I were to press 1 to go into front view, if we press this button, this does the same thing as this little button right here. This just turns on grid snapping. So now with this selected or that selected, you can press either one, you can press G to grab, then your object is going to snap to the grid. However, it only snaps the origin point of the object to the grid, which isn't exactly useful if we're trying to use the grid itself to space things. So that's why we have this snap to grid button. So if we press this, whatever you have selected will be made flush with the closest vertical line as well as the bottom horizontal line. And then now, so if we were to duplicate this, we have tight control over grid spacing to actually be able to use the increments on the grid. This actually works with a large selection as well. So if I were to press B to do a border select, maybe select all these, and then I were to press snap to grid, notice that all of these items now become flush with the grid so that we can use this to, actually do something. And then of course we can disable it right there. So that's about all the overviewing we're going to be doing of this basic builder menu. We'll be getting into these shape tools, dimensions, and physics control buttons a little later. So now back to the extended tools. First I'm going to tap A to select everything, press X to delete it all, Shift C to recenter my cursor, and then I'm just going to press Shift A and under Mesh, add a cube, press Alt and tap my middle mouse button, which zooms me in on whatever I've selected there. And if we press Tab to go back into edit mode, here are our mesh tools. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my 3D cursor snapping back on here. So we've gone over these basic tools. We click this basic button here. These are the basic kind of G to grab, R to rotate, S to scale, which you can activate with these buttons, which is nice to be able to see this when you're just, getting used to Blender. So we can extrude like this, which since we actually have every face of this selected, it extruded weird. So I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that. Or if we were to do an individual extrude, we'll of course extrude each face out in its own direction there. And then, subdivide, etc. So we've gone over these, as well as the show helpful tips button, which hopefully at this point you've got most of this stuff memorized. But over here in our extended tools, we've got two set of options going on here. We've got these immediate tools here, and then we have sub menus of tools down here. So if we were to click on this one, these are our vertex tools, these are our edge tools, our face tools, and this option is for cleanup. So we're going to save these cleanup options for another video, and we're also going to be focusing on the knife tool in another video as well. So first of all, if you want to close any of these bottom submenus here, a quick way to do that is just to click on basic and then you can click back to extended. So I'm going to press tab to go into object mode, X to delete all that, Shift A and add another cube, press tab to go back into edit mode. I'm going to go ahead and hit my full screen button here so we've got more room to work with. We can use the knife tool by either clicking on it or by pressing K. Down here, while we're using the knife tool, you'll notice a lot of information here about different options. So you may want to check these out and try each of these things. With the knife tool, we can click anywhere on a mesh, either on an edge, a vertex point, or just anywhere on a random face and make these cuts. When we are done making a cut, we can either press space to confirm or we can right click or double click, which will finish that cut, and you can actually move around and start another cut if you wanted to. When you're finished making with all your various cuts, you can just tap space, which confirms that, and now you've cut this mesh. So if I were to tap space for face selection and then select these faces here, I could press E to extrude, and so I've got this mesh out like this. Now there's an incredible amount of stuff we can do with the knife tool. That's why we're going to really save it for another video to get into it. But on to the bend tool. The bend tool is an organic way of bending your mesh. It's really cool for kind of like quick on-the-fly adjustments to things. If you're looking for a more complete control over doing something like that, I would recommend using the simple deform modifier. But for kind of just, quick on-the-fly adjustments, we can use this bend tool. If I were to select a face I wanted to bend, say this top face here, press this bend mesh, you'll see it bending horizontally and how I move it up and down vertically. The bending is actually going on relative to where our 3D cursor is. So if I were to right click and move my 3D cursor over here, and then press this bend mesh tool again, notice now that it's acting as though it's arcing over the position of the 3D cursor there. Now obviously the more mesh that there is for this tool to work with, the kind of cleaner the results are going to be. So if I were to press Control Z a few times and then tap A to select everything, and then tap W 3 or 4 times, so we've got a lot more subdivision in here. I'll make sure I just select this top group of faces here rather than the whole thing. Otherwise, it's just going to be trying to bend the whole thing simultaneously. And we enable proportional editing. Now, if we try to bend mesh, this is going to give us a lot more interesting results. We can actually scroll up and scroll down to increase or decrease the size of the proportional editing. And this makes using this tool a lot more interesting. So yeah, there's something for you to play around with. Next, we have the bisect mesh tool. Regardless of how complicated a mesh is, this will cut it in half samurai style. One thing to point out is that when you're using the bisect mesh tool, you have to have an area selected. So you have to either press A to select everything or just select the area where you want the cut to go. So if we were to click this and then click and hold our mouse down, we can see this line show up. And this line is showing where the segments will take place once we let go. So if we were to let go here, then this would bisect all the way through this mesh. We can either double tap space, which brings up our operator options, or if you prefer, you can click this little plus tab to bring up them here. Then we have some options such as fill here. And what this fill does is actually fills the inside of this cut, which you can't really see because both sides are still here, but we can actually get rid of either the top or the bottom part. And then we just have this as though it were really kind of Fruit Ninja styled, sliced straight through. So if we keep these and then we press the bisect mesh again and click and then drag to cut somewhere. And of course, I forgot to select the whole thing again because it will only do the cut where your selection is. So let's press Control Z to undo that, tap A to select everything, press bisect mesh, and we could do something like this. And there it is, cut in half. We could change which half, is sliced. So that's kind of a cool tool. But typically I prefer to use the knife tool to do this because the knife tool has an option which lets you cut straight through. And the advantage with the knife tool is you can be a lot more precise about where you want the cut to go. You don't have to pre-select anything. So for instance, if I were to click on the knife tool, notice in the options down here, the option to cut through, which is off, but if you press Z, you can change it to on. So I'll press Z, which turns cut through on. And the knife tool does a lot of nice, snapping to things so you can get really precise results. So if I say I wanted to cut to go, straight through here, I could just click to finish that cut, tap space to confirm, and now I've got this cut, all the way through here. It doesn't have the snazzy other little effects of the bisect mesh, but overall I find it to be a lot more functional. The collapse selected button is nice. It will just merge whatever faces, edges, vertex points, whatever into a single point. So if I were to say select a few faces here and press collapse selected, these will all be selected into a single point. Likewise, if I were to just say maybe shift select some vertex points, and press collapse selected, these will all be collapsed into a single point. I could even press A to select everything, press collapse selected, and you guess it, we get a single vertex point now. So I could press, say, E to extrude this, E to extrude that, tap A to select all that, tap F to create a face for that, press E to extrude. I'm going to go ahead and close my operator menu there because it's getting on my nerves. Slide selected. What this will do is allow you to slide either a face, edge, or selection of vertex points along the mesh. So for instance, say I selected this vertex point here and I wanted to move it, and let me come down here and turn off proportional editing. So say I wanted to move it, but I didn't want to just, kind of eyeball it. The slide selected allows you to slide mesh parallel to the edges and faces it already belongs to. So I can move this vertex point down along any one of these lines by pressing slide selected. And you'll see that kind of little yellow line showing us where the line that it's trailing is, and we can just kind of move it along those lines if we want. The hotkey for this is just GG. Since we're already using G to grab things, it's nice to just know we can quickly double tap G to be able to slide it along the mesh it belongs to. And this gets to be a lot more useful the more complicated your mesh is. And then finally we have the shrink fatten, which we have used quite a bit, and especially in our object from selection video. So for instance, if I were to click this face here and then shift, select these faces around here and press Shift D to create an object from selection here. Now, if I were to press E to extrude this, it extrudes, but that's not really what I want to happen. So if I press Ctrl Z and then press E to extrude and then right click to cancel the movement part of that extrusion, and I click Shrink Fatten, then these are all going to move out uniformly from this area, which is what I want. Now this comes especially in handy when you are creating clothes and assets and features and things like that for characters and objects. It's a really nice alternative to just either scaling or the default extrusion, which won't necessarily give you the results you want. So that's it for now. In the next video, we're going to be covering stuff going on in these submenus.